That's great. Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thanks for joining us at this Pearson English webinar today. It's great to see so many of you here. A certificate and a recording link will be sent to you all after the session. And please, if you have any questions, submit them in the chat box in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. It's my pleasure to hand over to Andrew Khan. Thank you.
Thank you, Charlie. So there was a change of presenter for today's presentation. It was meant to be Marianne Martin, who's our product expert. She's feeling a little under the weather today. So unfortunately for you, you're stuck with me, but hopefully it will still be an interesting and engaging presentation, looking at analyzing skill gaps and helping to ease K12 learners back into learning using digital assessment. So we'll be looking at a couple of key themes in this presentation. We'll be looking at what causes learning gaps, assessing ability and monitoring progress, the value of online assessment, assessing proficiency across the academic year, and assessing proficiency across the broader learning journey. We'll be thinking about all of these things in the context of the Pearson English Benchmark Test and the Pearson English Benchmark for Young Learners. We'll obviously also round out the session with some questions and answers as well. So I look forward to that. As Charlie mentioned, please do type your questions in the chat as we go through. But we'll start off with a poll because we'd like to know a little bit more about you as well. So Charlie, if you could, fantastic, thank you. So do you teach primary, secondary, or both? And how are you currently running your classes, in online or both in person and online? So we'll just give you a minute to vote on that. Charlie will be running the poll.
Yeah, I'd say another 20 odd seconds.
Thank you, Charlie, and we'll be sharing those results as well with you.
Fantastic. Okay, we've had about 45% votes here. I think we've got some pretty good answers there. Okay, great.
Thank you, Charlie. I can see that the majority of people, or the largest group, are teaching both primary and secondary, followed by primary, followed by secondary. So you'll, irrespective of who you're teaching, you'll hear something that will be relevant to you today, hopefully. There's another question as well, which is something I'd like you to type into the chat. And it's something I think that it will be interesting for you to share with the other participants in the chat who are taking part in this call. How has your students' progress changed over the last year and why? An interesting question to kick things off. We'll just give you a minute or two to answer that and to read other people's replies in the chat. While we're doing that, I'd just like to thank you again for joining this presentation. It's part of a series, so there's quite a few presentations going on today. We'll be having more as we go on. There's a big assessment day coming up on the 17th of November. So please do join us if you're interested in learning more about assessment on the 17th in particular. There should be all sorts of different things throughout that are relevant to your interests as teachers and as educators. Wonderful, thank you very much. So we'll just move on now while you're reading those replies. Looking at what causes gaps in learning. So this is something I think obviously teachers will know very well, is that learners learn at different rates. So some people pick up language skills very quickly. I'm not one of those people, unfortunately. I learn languages very slowly, and I think that obviously a lot of teachers will have encountered learners like me in the past. And then you have the majority of people who are somewhere in the middle. And part of that is down to perhaps their innate general ability when it comes to learning languages. there are a number of different factors that can exacerbate that, including their home life, their degree of motivation, the perceived importance of the language they're learning to them, and the relevance to their own lives of the materials they're using to learn English. Another factor, particularly I think with English, is the degree of exposure they have outside of the class. So if they're very much immersed in English television, English books, whatever else it might be, they may pick up some of those skills a little bit more quickly. They may also be more motivated to learn. But that's the kind of the situation in a normal year. And of course, this is not a normal year for most learners. So over the last 9 or so months, many learners will have experienced a disruption to their study, or at the very least, a major shift in how they're studying. So in some cases, if the student is fortunate enough to be able to use, perhaps they've got some extra time at home, they can use that time to immerse themselves in learning. They might have progressed faster than they'd have expected at the start of the year. In others, maybe a more difficult situation, they might have had a long period where little or no study could take place. So those skills are not being practiced regularly, and that knowledge, perhaps the knowledge they had just before they started lockdown or whatever it might be, hasn't been fully embedded or retained in their minds. And the other factor, of course, is that learning English is a social activity for most learners. You can perhaps imagine a situation in which a very good, very diligent learner is making the best of the situation by focusing heavily on reading materials in English, and has developed a stronger set of reading skills as a result. However, if they haven't focused on speaking, if they haven't had so much interaction with other learners or much one-on-one time with the teacher, you could imagine a situation in which their reading skills have gone up, but their speaking and listening skills have either stayed the same or perhaps even declined. So, depending on the situation and the circumstances, you might be coming back to a classroom or a digital classroom full of learners who have had very different experiences over the last few months. And that makes the job of being a teacher, the job of planning lessons, a lot more challenging. So there's a couple of really difficult things to look at here. How do you know learners are on track to meet their study targets? How can you check on individual learning needs and identify students who might be perhaps falling behind? How do you design lessons for a group of learners that might have a more diverse set of skills than would otherwise have been expected at this stage? How can you motivate those learners and show evidence of their progress to parents? Of course, how as a teacher can you see the impact that you have on those learners as well to motivate yourself? So there's a lot of very challenging things here. And I'm from an assessment background, so I'm a little bit biased here, but I think that assessment can play a very large role in answering all of these questions. And you might be thinking at this stage, okay, my learners are at the, let's say, CFR B1 stage before the disruption. They're probably mostly at B1 now. What good is assessment going to do? What can it tell me that I don't already know? And hopefully this presentation will answer that question. So you might already know about those in-course, in-book, end-of-chapter tests that are designed to monitor understanding of the content that's just been covered. And you might also know about things like PT General, those formally certificated tests you might take to measure proficiency at the end of the year or end of the course. We're going to be looking at something a little bit different today. And there's something that to me is very exciting. And I think looking at what's available out there at the moment is unique. And that's our benchmark tests and the broader idea of benchmark testing. So benchmark testing starts with a very simple theory. If tests are accurate enough and can provide enough detail, then taking a test at the start of the year and taking one sometimes later, perhaps the middle of the year, the end of the year, whatever it might be, would show a meaningful difference between the results of point A and point B. And so this is a way to check on progress the learner might have made over time and help understand, sort of like a diagnostic, what to do with them next. So that sounds very straightforward. It sounds obvious. Why isn't everybody doing it? To me, I think the answer is that it's really quite challenging to do. It's not an easy task, and I think there's a couple of reasons why. So you have to start with a scale. You need to start with a scale for results that's consistent and meaningful, that can inform learning, like the CEFR, but offers much more granular detail. So instead of progress being visible over maybe 1 or 2 years, you can check movement over 150 or 200 guided learning hours. You need to have tests that are very fast and engaging, so they don't feel like too much of a chore to take or for teachers to administrate. And it's something I hear a lot being in the assessment field, is that parents are really worried about exam fatigue. The idea that the more you test, the less you know about that learner because of the process of taking tests can be quite stressful. Something that learners can get quite bored with as well. So the results that come back aren't necessarily always particularly useful. Also for the teachers, I mean, every teacher I've ever spoken to has better things to be doing than setting tests, marking tests, tabulating all the results. It really does take a lot of your time potentially. So that's, again, one of the reasons why ongoing assessment throughout the year might not be something that people are ready to take on. Ideally, you'd have something that has very accurate and objective results. It's not easy for different teachers to identify and agree on what might be relatively small changes to proficiency. Should potentially also give you not just a score, but recommendations for that learner and the whole class, for a link to books you're using for what to do with them next. And of course, the other factor we always sometimes forget is that tests very often cost money. And with school budgets being very tight, and parents perhaps in a difficult situation, maybe even a more difficult situation now, having to make some choices, anything that you do offer them has to be very, very good value for money. So all of these things combine into a situation, I would say, where benchmark testing sounds like it is a nice idea, but for lots of teachers, it might also sound a little bit unrealistic to implement. However, I would say that digital testing offers us an opportunity to meet a lot of these challenges head on. So digital testing, I would say, opens up opportunities for assessment tools that are fast and easy to administer. They can be objective and reliable, maybe even more objective than human rating can, so teachers giving their own opinions even. Flexible enough to take from home or perhaps even school if schools have reopened. Precise enough to give real insights into learners' proficiency, and something you can really trust and rely upon. So there's really interesting things in the field of digital assessment being developed by Pearson, and we'll take a look now at some of those tests that we're looking at specifically for this benchmarking purpose. So we have the English benchmark test and the English benchmark for young learners. Now, both of these tests use cutting-edge artificial intelligence-powered scoring to provide highly accurate results against the CEFR and Pearson's much more detailed global scale of English. This enables learners to show their level of proficiency, but also, due to that granular scale, demonstrate how that proficiency changes over time. I think that, to me, is a really key point. It's great for learners because it means that they can get feedback much more quickly than with traditional exams. It can take anything up to, we think, 1,100 hours of teacher-led instruction to progress from B1 to B2. So if you're using traditional tests that only measure at the level of the CEFR bands, it could be a couple of years, as I said, before you're able to see any concrete progress. And that can be incredibly demotivating. So if you're sitting there at the end of 2 years study thinking, well, I was B1 when I started, I'm B1 now, you might be thinking, well, why did I bother? Why am I paying my teacher for this? With benchmark, you can track the progress within that band. You can see that you've gone from a low B1 to a high B1. You're almost ready for B2. And that really does give you a sense of forward momentum. The results also have performance summaries and activity recommendations as well. So also has some learning objectives for self-study. So if learners want to, outside of the classroom, do a little bit of self-study, got some suggestions for them. One of the great things is that a lot of these recommendations are linked to Pearson courseware. teachers are very often already using. So if you see a learner has to improve particular skills, like speaking, you can take the book you're working with from our online results system. It gives you a recommendation based on that. There's no need for teachers to hunt through their textbooks to find suitable things. And of course, as it reports on the CFR and the GSE, it's also course agnostic. So you can use any book or design your own course, you'll still get accurate results and be able to see progress. Even better, because these are computer scored tests, now the results come back within an hour. So all of that really powerful information coming back to you almost instantly. So very, very unlike those traditional labor-intensive tests. Looking at a couple of items here from the benchmark tests, you can see some of the things are fairly familiar. Describe a picture, you've got a reading comprehension question, and this test, of course, is for 14 years and older. You've also got integrated tasks. So you've got here, as an example, listening and speaking. And the use of integrated tasks, which of course is how we use English in real life, means that we can get very detailed results without the test being overly long. Very often people think, well, if I'm going to have a very precise test, a very accurate test, it needs to be a long test. With the use of computer scoring, or with the use of integrated skills, you can take that test that might have been otherwise, say, 3 hours, 2 hours, cut it down, in our case, with the benchmark tests, to 45 minutes. So again, it's a fun test, it should be fairly engaging, it's also not too long. So the idea of exam fatigue hopefully can be avoided. A little bit more information on those benchmark tests for 14 years and up. They're taken on a computer. They're based on situations that are very familiar to students of different ages. So you will have material in there that's appropriate for adults and maybe appropriate also for kind of anyone from the age of 14 and up. There are 4 different levels: A, B1, B2, and C, meaning that each has content focusing very specifically on that CFR range. There are 3 test forms per level, so you can have a beginning test, a middle test, and an end test. You'll have a different test every time. And as mentioned, there's information there to help learners with self-study. So hopefully that all sounds quite interesting, but of course, the key thing is the information that comes out of that test. So we'll look now at a student report for the English benchmark test. You can see here, you have your GSE score, in this case 58. You have your CFR band below that. We have B1 plus here. And you have a nice description of overall language abilities. So these are your overall scores, your overall current capabilities statement. Just below that, you also have your skill scores. So that's skill scores for listening, reading, speaking, and writing. You can see in this situation, the learner has done very well in the test. They've hit the ceiling for the scores for the B1 test, and they've scored 58 in everything. In a normal situation, you might have a learner that scored higher in listening than in speaking, for example, higher in reading than in writing. At a glance, instantly, with this nice chart here, you can see immediately what their skills are, where they're strongest, where they're weakest. It's not a case of having to sit down, look through some tables of data. It's right here for you. So that's useful at the overall level. What do you see at the skill level? Moving on to the next slide. You can see here that you've got a student that scored 49 for reading. You have a performance summary for the skill of reading. You have some recommended activities. And I think one of the really clever things here is that you can also have those recommended activities linked to a Pearson coursebook. So if you're using, for example, Speak Out, you can just choose Speak Out from the drop-down menu, and it'll tell you which exercises in that book that you might be using will be appropriate to help that learner improve their reading skills and get to where they need to go next. So it saves a lot of time, saves a lot of running about for the teachers. You don't need to be searching through all your textbooks. It will tell you which exercises can be used with this learner to improve the skills that they need to improve. And of course, there's also the GSE framework in the background. So you have can-do statements throughout, much more detailed can-do statements, many more can-do statements than CFR, that will tell you what that learner might be wanting to focus on next to improve their reading score for the next time they take that test. We don't have too much time to talk about the GSE today. I would certainly recommend looking at our GSE teacher toolkit online. It's a huge amount of information now, fantastic resource for teachers, and it's all 100% free. So take a look at that. I think that once you start to see the value of GSE, the value of benchmark testing becomes really immediately obvious. So that's fantastic at the individual level. But of course, a lot of teachers, particularly if you've got a larger class, can't always work at the individual level. You need to look at the group as well. So we have those fantastic group reports, and we have an example here. So very similar to the individual student reports, we have the group current capabilities as an average for those skills. You have the median average skills scores per skill, rather. So you can see as a class, okay, my class is doing a little bit better in speaking than in writing. I can focus as a group on improving those speaking scores, maybe a little bit more time spent on speaking as you go forward for the next semester. You also have a nice list of those students with those scores there immediately visible to you as well. So it gives you a lot of information as a teacher. I think speaking to teachers who've used this is one of those valuable features. So it really does help in lesson planning. It shows you exactly where you're making an impact, but also where your students, as a whole, on average, do need to improve. And again, it gives a little bit more of a granular look than you might find with other ways of assessing them. So this is fantastic, hopefully, for learners who are aged 14 and up. But there are a number of people on this on the call who are teaching primary as well. We have a product for you, and that is the English Benchmark Young Learners Test. So it's aimed at learners between the ages of 6 and 14. Again, it's all on the GSE. It's all linked to the CFR as well. And we've tried to make it a fun and engaging test. And again, I think parents, particularly of those younger learners, they don't like the idea always of having too many tests. So we thought, why not create a test that doesn't feel like a test? Let's have something that has all of that fantastic detailed information, really useful information that teachers can use, that doesn't feel like you're taking an exam. So we made it as a tablet-based app, and it's relatively short. So again, 16 minutes to 45 minutes, depending on the level you take. There are 6 levels from pre-A1 all the way through to B1+. So you can choose the right level for the students you're working with. It's not too easy, not too hard. And again, there are 5 tests per level here. So you can use it over 1 school year, or you might be able to use it over more school years as well. So for example, if you've got a learner who is taking level 2, they can have 5 attempts at level 2 over the course of a year or 2 years, and they'll get a different test every time. You might find, if the learner's progressing quite well after the 2nd or 3rd test, you might think, okay, they're ready to move on to level 3. They can do that, that's not a problem. You've got the flexibility there. If the learners aren't taking a little bit of time to move through those levels, you've got 5 different tests and a different test every time. And I think one of the really valuable things about this test, it also has a fantastic parents report. So we often see parents who can really engage very well with children who are learning English, because their level of English is quite good as well. So they can work with them, they can see, they can interact, they can see immediately how much progress they're making. And that's not necessarily the case for everybody. A lot of parents don't feel confident doing that, or they may have no English background whatsoever. So they're relying on the teacher to say, yes, this student is progressing very well. They've gone from this level, this book, this class to the next class. What is sometimes a little bit challenging for teachers is to give some objective evidence to back up those claims. And that really is what the Benchmark Young Learners Test does. It shows parents really straightforwardly where the student started, where they are now, and the level of progress in between. And that's something that's really valuable. You know, as we said, particularly when parents have to pay money for courses, perhaps they want to know the value of those courses, the value of their investment in their child learning English. This is something that shows that very, very simply. And again, as I mentioned, try to make it fun. And it's the only time working in assessment for many years I've ever had a situation where I've been in a classroom, learners are taking tests, they get to the end of that test, they put their hand up and they say, "Can I take another one, please?" Because it was so fun, so engaging, and they enjoyed it so much. Never happened in my life before this test. And part of the reason, of course, is they get this kind of a gamified element. So there's things like drag and drop, clicking on the right things, quite familiar from other games they might be using, other educational tools they might be using. But this tests their level of English at the same time. We've got videos in there. We've got all sorts of really interesting things to keep their level of engagement up and to get a really strong, reliable measure of their level of English. One of the things we do find is that, particularly for younger learners, if they do get a little bit too stressed, then the accuracy of the test they're using will go down. If they feel like they're engaging with the game, it maybe sounds a little bit counterintuitive, but if you take a little bit of that pressure off, the assessment tools can potentially be even more reliable, even more accurate if they're engaging with something and they're really enjoying it and having fun with it, rather than being worried that maybe this isn't the right answer, maybe that's not the right answer. Again, as with benchmark, we have a really good set of data reports that sit behind this. So you've got those student and those group reports offering, again, at a glance views of their overall level of proficiency. You have those detailed results per skill, and you have the ability to link those back to the Pearson course books you might be using as well. So if you're using Pearson books, that's fantastic. But of course, because it's against the CFR, and because it's against the global scale of English, specifically the children's GCSE, it doesn't matter which approach you're taking to learning English, as long as those learners are moving through the stages, as long as they're moving through the GCSE, then you will see progress against these results. And we also have fantastic progress reports as well. So again, it's not a case of looking at data. You can see for each individual student a nice chart.
Andrew, I'm sorry to disturb, but your audio is cutting out. It doesn't sound like a signal problem. It sounds like you came a bit away from the microphone.
I think it might just be an internet connection problem. I'll try to, bear with me a second, I'll just try to reconnect my internet. It might just be a little bit slower in the afternoon.
Sure. Okay, fair enough. If you don't mind repeating the last sentence or two, if you could.
Yes, of course, absolutely, no problem. Well, it's good because I've moved on to the right slide anyway. So we're talking about progress and the idea of showing progress. So what we're doing here is again, giving something to teachers that's very visual, very easy to read, and it's not looking at a lot of numbers, a lot of data. You can see here multiple test attempts, and with each individual skill, how much progress has been made with that skill from one attempt to the other. But again, very, very simple to look at, very easy to understand, and it shows immediately progress against this particular learner over a course of time. Now, one thing that is, I think, really important to stress is that you do need to leave enough time between test attempts. If you take a test and take a test another couple of weeks later, you're going to very likely get the same results. And that's good because it means the tests are accurate and they're reliable, but it doesn't actually help you as a teacher, and it doesn't help you as a learner to just essentially have the same result. You need to have enough time between test attempts, whether you're using benchmark or the benchmark young learners tests, for meaningful progress to have taken place. So we can work with you on that, certainly, but I think the idea is very much working with you to tailor, depending on how many hours of English that learner might be getting per week. It may be a case of taking 2 tests a year. It may be a case of taking 3 tests a year. It really does work on your schedule and with the level of English that your students are able to get on a regular basis. And we also have those parents' reports that I mentioned as well. And I think this is a terrific innovation. being able to give something directly to parents that is objective and meaningful. And at the moment, we've got those in English, Chinese, Turkish, and Spanish. Potentially, you can add more languages there as we go. So that's a really nice way to keep parents engaged in that learning journey. Additional nice factor, I think, particularly for the younger learners, is the idea of sort of soft certification, we call it. So these are not formally certified tests, not something you take to necessarily get into a different school, but something you can hold in your hand, you can pin on your wall, you can show to your friends, show to your parents, that says, okay, I've achieved something with English. And it's all very child-friendly, got nice designs, stars, owls, all sorts of things. But yeah, I think a really nice way to keep learners motivated and engaged. And of course, you've also got those certificates for the students that didn't score very high. So it's not really about just providing certificates to the top scoring students. It's something that everybody, as long as they've engaged with the test, as long as they've taken the test and they've had a good effort, you'll get that kind of good effort certificate for lower scoring students as well. So you don't have to leave anybody empty-handed. So I think a fantastic resource there. How do you actually use these in the classroom? This is, I think, a good slide that kind of identifies very simply how that testing process works over the school year. So you might find you start with obviously the first test, that is your baseline. As a teacher, you then review those results and use those results to inform your instruction and your planning of instruction as you go forward. And you've got options here. As I mentioned, you've got that group report. So you can use that report to set the class goals. You can use it to plan lessons, to see overall, yes, I need to be focusing more on writing and reading this term. You can also, if you have the time, really personalize learning in a really meaningful way by using those individual student reports for remediation. So if a student is maybe a little bit behind the class on one skill, perhaps it might be a case of using those results to help them with additional homework or additional materials that will really get them up to speed with what they're meant to be doing. Another nice factor is that you can use those results to group or differentiate in your classes. And that's, I think, really important for bigger classes. You might have 2 or 3 learners who are fantastic at reading and 2 or 3 learners that are not doing so well in reading. You can get them to work together so they can potentially help each other. So and again, a nice way to use that data meaningfully in class. Of course, all of this leads up to that teaching, the courseware that comes along with that, those course-based assessments. So those things that you take at the end of the lesson, end of the unit, to check the understanding of the content that's come along with it, and the fantastic GSE assessment framework as well. That would lead up to your second test. The stage of the second test, that is where you can see the difference between the scores you got the first time around and the scores you got the second time around. But of course, it's a cycle. So you then use that second test to inform your instructional planning as you go forward again. So a really nice encapsulation of how it all works. And it's something I think a lot of teachers will find very intuitive, very easy to understand. How it fits into the broader learning journey is also very important. So the way that we've worked through our portfolio with English assessment is we've got 4 different categories: place, benchmark, certify, and verify. So placement is really where you have no idea whatsoever of that learner's level of English. Perhaps they've just come to you, it's the first day of class, you need to know which class do I put them in, which book do I give them. So that's where you'd have our level test very typically used alongside benchmark. So you take your level test, that tells you which level of benchmark to take, which class to go into. You'd follow up with benchmark, and then you'd use benchmark as we've discussed in that virtuous circle of learning, assessment, diagnostics, informing teaching, and then learning some more. If at some stage you get to a point where the learner needs to have something that is tangible, physical to hold in their hands to show the outside world, that's not just their parents. So it might be a local university, a local school, potentially an employer. We have our formally certified tests, so international certificates, they know as PT General. And for the younger learners, there's a nice formal exam that goes along with that as well, the PT Young Learners, or this International Certificate for Young Learners. At the absolute end of that spectrum, we have PTE Academic and PT Home in our Verify category. So Verify and Certify are similar in some ways, but Verify is where you get into the area of having biometric security. So palm vein scanning, you have CCTV cameras, you have special highly secure test centers. That's really if you want to take a test that will enable you to overcome an institutional barrier. It might be, for example, going to university in an English-speaking country. It might be emigration to the UK, Australia, New Zealand. That's really where our Verify category fits in. But of course, because we're using the GSE, you can level the students with the GSE, you can use benchmark to improve their level of English. And then ultimately, if they do end up wanting to go to university in another country, you have PT Academic scored on the GSE as well. So really, really useful set of tests that will hopefully meet all stages of the learning journey. We really do believe in the right test for the right points of that journey. And just moving on to recap. So disrupted year, very difficult, really important, perhaps more important than ever before, to have an understanding of both student needs and class needs. So the English Benchmark Young Learners and benchmark tests provide formative information. You can quickly and effectively baseline those students, gain insight into their proficiency, plan for your classes and individuals to achieve their learning goals, measure and demonstrate progress both to learners and to the parents. And I think, again, for me, one of the key things is to motivate students to keep learning. If you can see they're making progress, even small progress is better than having no information whatsoever. And that really is what the GSE can do, and it's what this assessment can do as well. It's motivating learners to keep learning and at the same time providing a fantastic amount of data and information to the teachers to help make teaching more effective. So I think that's where I will leave it. We've still got time for questions and answers. I'll hand over to Charlie.
Great, thank you, Andrew. Once again, a great session. Thanks very much for your time in putting the slides together and delivering it, and for stepping in for Marianne last minute, of course.
Anytime.
Fantastic. So we've had 2 or 3 questions. A lot of interest in the tests you're looking at. Alex has asked, where can I take the test?
Really good question. So as a teacher, what you can certainly do is get in touch with your local Pearson team. They will work with you to understand which tests are right for you and work with you on how those tests are delivered. Make sure you've got a really good understanding of those tests. So that's the starting point. But if you're a teacher, you can try it out at home. If you're a learner, there's a flexibility here that really does enable, I think the majority of cases, you'll have students taking it in their classroom environment with a teacher who is helping oversee that. We're starting to see, obviously, under the current circumstances, a lot of learners aren't in school. So you need to have something that has the flexibility to be taken at home as well. So I think with benchmark in particular for the older learners, we've had a lot of people taking the test at home, and that report goes back to the teacher. It's a really nice way for the teachers to still be able to keep an eye in a really detailed way on what those learners are doing while they're perhaps not as physically visible. We also have some the younger learners, the benchmark younger learners taking from home as well. The idea is full flexibility as to where these tests can be taken, as long as you've got a quiet environment, you've got the headset and microphone, whatever else it might be. But the first step of this journey is always getting in contact with your local Pearson team, and they will work with you to really have a good session to diagnose the needs, the assessment needs of your class, and help you along that journey.
That's great. Thank you, Andrew. And again, I would just like to highlight that next Tuesday, the 17th of November, is dedicated solely to assessment. So I'm sharing a link to the agenda now. If you navigate to the 4th day, which is Tuesday, November the 17th, you'll be able to find a whole raft of sessions solely aimed at our assessment. Sorry, go on, Andrew.
So I was going to say, if I could do a little bit of self-promotion, I'm doing a webinar on testing from home. So quite relevant to this conversation as well. So testing from home with remote monitoring. So please do sign up for that. Charlie, apologies for interrupting you.
No, not at all, not at all. I was just going to say I've also shared a link to the assessment website. So please click on that Pearson.com English Catalogue Assessment link so you can find out everything you need to know about what Andrew's talked about today, specifically who to go to find out even more information. And after you've done that, please do check out the schedule of the remaining webinars for this Ready for webinar series, which is running until the 19th of November. So, Andrew, we haven't had any other questions.
I did just see one on the chat, if I can. There's a question that came in. Are these sold as packages for schools? And that is, again, I think a really important point, is that yes, this is designed primarily for teachers to work with students on. So what we'd do is we'd sell a certain number of licenses for these tests, and you've got full flexibility. So what you might do is, for example, you buy 100 licenses, we don't tell you who can take those tests, when they can take those tests. It's entirely up to you. So you take 100 licenses, you can test 100 students once, you can take 50 students and test them twice, you can take 33 students and test them 3 times, fully up to you. And again, one of the really crucial points is there's flexibility within those levels. So you don't have to think, I'm going to buy the B1 test because my learners are at B1. And you take the first test, and some of those learners actually, they probably do the B2 test. Some of those learners, maybe they'd be better off with the A test. You can move them around. You can take that test, those codes, and use them for whichever levels you want to. So very flexible as a package. Also, have a discussion with your local team about bundling with courseware as well. So I would say part of the real value, the real power of these tests comes when they're used alongside Pearson courseware. You can use them without, but it's a really nice way to integrate assessment and that courseware side of things as well. So talk to your local team about the idea of bundling a package of books and tests together.
Brilliant. Okay, I haven't seen any other questions come in. Andrew, was there anything else you wanted to add there?
Really just to say, firstly, an apology. I understand my internet cut out for a little bit. I have to confess my cat sat on my laptop earlier and he's very heavy. And I think the cable might have come out a little bit, so that could explain it. I will blame him for that. But really just to say thank you so much for attending, for engaging. Forward to seeing the feedback. And yes, enjoy the rest of these sessions. There's so much to learn. I'm learning a lot myself. And yeah, thank you so much for attending. And thank you to facilitate.
Thank you, Andrew. Once again, a brilliant session, and thank you to every one of you attendees for your time today. We hope to see you at another Pearson English webinar very soon. A quick note, certificates and a recording will be sent out soon also. Thanks very much and have a good day.
Take care.